Jeremy is going to talk about his very different way of doing architectural groups, designs. And Nadine has a fascinating house to show us. So I think I might pass it straight over to you.
Thank you, and really beautiful welcome to country. Thank you for that. Acknowledgement to country. Sorry. My apologies. I'm a middle-aged, middle-class white guy from Wurundjeri lands, about 3 kilometres north of here. I'm going to talk about Nightingale. And so yes, I'm an architect. Before I was an architect, I was a human. And as a human, my parents, worked in a number of areas. My father was a big advocate in social justice and in housing. And my mother cared deeply about the environment and dragged me around to a bunch of marches as a kid. I watched them protest a lot, and I went to a lot of protests as a kid. I sold a lot of nuclear disarmament badges at festivals. I painted shadows on the footpath with my dad as a kid for Hiroshima Day. And I guess as I watched in dismay, I didn't see many things changed. And so what I thought I would do through my professional career is try and change things from within the belly of the beast rather than from the outside. I studied environmental design, and in 1989 there was one place to do that, and that was Tasmania as an undergrad. And so I went to Tasmania and studied there for 6 years. Because after my undergrad, I then stayed on to study architecture there. And it taught me about this incredible landscape, and that perhaps the best thing that we can do for the environment is to stay the fuck out of it. And so a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about is actually about urbanization and how do we build sustainably within an urban environment, and how do we keep humans out of the environment. I went on to work in a big architecture practice. When I started there were 8 architects. When I left, there were 50. When I started there, we were working on a 6-story building next to Queen Victoria Market called Melbourne Terrace, which was this beautiful kind of walk-up apartment building. When I left there, I was working on Eureka Tower, which was 88 stories. It was glass facing north, south, east, and west. And my last 6 weeks at Katsalitas were drawing the car park. And I didn't think that actually was, the right path for me. So I left in 2000 and I started a practice called Breathe Architecture. It was called Breathe Architecture because in Eureka Tower, anything above level 33, you couldn't have openable windows because the wind speeds were so high, they'd suck the furniture out of the apartment. So they're all hermetically sealed above level 33 when I left. So I called Breathe Architecture with this simple idea that every room would have a window that you could open so you'd be able to breathe. So that's kind of where we started. And we started like any other architect. So we designed houses for rich people because architects design 3% of houses in this country for the 3% of the most entitled people in the country. We did that for a long time. And when you Googled Sustainable Architects Melbourne, we came up, we were one of 6 architects in 2001 that was listed as, as a sustainable architect. If you Google Sustainable Architects now, we're one of 42,000 entries apparently under Sustainable Architects Melbourne. So it's not a big thing anymore. Apparently everyone does it. And then we started to work with property developers thinking that perhaps we could take this idea of, sustainability, not just for one individual family at a time, but we could do it, close to railway stations, close to tram lines, close to the places where it should be built. And we could look at increasing density, and we could kind of bring sustainability to at a bigger scale. So we started working with developers like Grocon. And when you read Grocon's website, it's got this incredible sustainability statement, and it talks about what it is that they want to do as an organization. And then we met with their design manager, who's this incredible guy who seems totally committed to that. And then as we got into this big organization and working with development companies like that, we found that it was very, very hard as an architect to be able to deliver on either what the company mission says about sustainability or on what we thought were sustainable, goals. Our most successful project working in the open market for a property developer was converting a car park to an apartment building. So we converted, an old car park into apartments. And I'll talk about cars in a minute. Probably I'll talk about cars a lot, but we converted. So this is my favorite one because our planning system currently intrinsically links cars to housing, cars to habitat. And so our car parking numbers, which our car parking scheme is, our car parking numbers are predicated on now, were first written in 1966 by the Texas Department of Transport and Infrastructure. That's where our car park numbers came from. That got built into our planning scheme, and then over time it's been adjusted. It's been tweaked by numbers up and down, but it's an arbitrary number, which started pre-peak oil in the United States, in perhaps one of the worst states in the States, on car parking. What we do know is that the more car parking you provide, the more people drive. That's one thing that can be guaranteed. So this one building that we did as architects working for private developers was to take a car park and take it away from cars and give it back to humans. And this car park incredibly had a northerly aspect out to the roof of the State Library. So you looked out over the dome and down into all the conservatory windows, so you could see these incredible books being conserved. And that's where cars were parking. And because the building across the road, the State Library, was a heritage building, it could never be built out. So you'd always get northern sun. Anyway, so we won the 2015 Houses Sustainability Award for that particular apartment project. And we were incredibly, proud of that. Apart from that, if you look at Breathe architecture under our kind of, our multi-residential housing, you won't see many examples of projects that we're proud of in there around sustainable housing projects. In 2007, we decided to embark on a project of our own to try and change the way that that Melbourne saw housing. And I'm going to talk through kind of, I guess the arc from us from 2007 till now in 2019. Oh, sorry. Cool. So we've got a population issue. And I know that, economists like to think that the answer to any problem is endless growth. And we seem to have that in Melbourne. So we're growing at 100,000 or more Melburnians every year, year on year, for the next 35 years. And our current housing system has been to put people in investor-driven apartments in the CBD and Docklands, or to try and allow people to buy into the Great Australian Dream at the city's edges. Both of these are market-driven solutions because the state government gave over their responsibility to housing in the 80s, and they gave it to the private market. So we've had 28 years of uninterrupted economic growth. We're the richest country per capita in the world, and we have 115,000 homeless people. And this is what our city looks like. It's what a great amount of money does. Makes a horrible mess. So, and the interesting thing about this is Melbourne Centre. This is Melbourne's edges. In fact, that's not Melbourne's edges anymore. It's Craigieburn. That's 26 kilometres north of here. Interesting thing about the image of Craigieburn for those at the back is that the one thing that you won't see, can anyone tell me what's missing on the streets? Trees, yeah, of course you'd say trees. Anything else that you'd see on other streets? What's that? No solar, no people, no cars. So where are all the cars? No, they're inside. So if you live here, the way that you enter these houses is through the garage. So you drive to the city, and if it's busy, it takes you an hour and 15 minutes. And then your partner needs a car as well to be able to get to the city. So it takes them an hour and 15 minutes, and they work in a different part of the city. You both have to come home, and then to get into your house, you drive into the driveway, into the garage, and the roller door comes down behind you, and you get out and you walk into the dining room. You can watch TV. If you need a loaf of bread or some milk, you get back into your car, the roller door comes up, and you drive 3 kilometres to the nearest supermarket, where you get your stuff and you come back and you drive back home into your Rollidor again. So the great thing about living there is that there are these big houses on these quite small blocks with quite dark roofs, very close to each other, but you never, ever, ever have to talk to your neighbour. There's an incredible sense of social isolation and high degrees of anxiety in these types of settlements. And in the city, if you live in this apartment building here, there's 400 apartments in there. And when you get out of the lift lobby, there's 8 lifts, and you get out of the lift and there's 32 doors off that lift lobby. And you don't talk to anyone because you're probably never going to see them again. There's this sense of anonymity there. So you stand quietly in the lift and you don't bother engaging in someone. So there's, again, this incredible sense of modern isolation, despite the incredible proximity in which people are living. So in both of these instances, we've seen incredible failure of kind of our social city planning. This is housing of spreadsheet, housing of economics, and it's not a housing of of anthropology or of how we want to live together as people. The City of Melbourne under Rob Adams looked at how do we actually house people in a meaningful way? If we have to house 3 million more Melburnians in the next 35 years, how are we going to do that? And they looked at successful examples which have existed pre 80-story towers and pre urban sprawl. So they looked at Rome, they looked at Barcelona, they looked at Paris, looked at Amsterdam, I even looked at New York. I've seen some incredible images of New York pre-motor car, where the streets are totally occupied by playing children and street vendors, and the streets were a place for people, not a place for cars. And they historically looked at Melbourne. And so the way that Melbourne used to work was a set of villages around train stations or particular tram stops or a market. So there was a reason for each of these places to be. People would work and live in those same villages. They would live upstairs, work downstairs. Their kids would go to the local school. There was a strong sense of community there. What they found through that study was that they could house, of the 3 million people that were coming to Melbourne over the next 35 years, Rob Adams' team at the city design team at the City of Melbourne worked out that they could house 2 million people, so 2/3 of that population growth on high streets. So Nicholson Street, Lygon Street, Sydney Road, on train lines, tram lines, where people could be serviced by their local community, rather than building at the city's edges, where historically we used to grow our food. So we've currently built over 40% of our food bowls. And we're importing food from China, we're importing food from the rest of Asia, we're importing food from the States. And I wonder what's going to happen, with climate change. If China needs to feed 1.4 billion people, are they going to be selling us food? Or are they going to be keeping that food for themselves to keep their own population? So what happens to us then? So we looked at the City of Melbourne's plans about, if we can house people successfully close to public transport and infrastructure, perhaps we would try it. So in 2007, after the Kevin 07 election, in the sunny streets of Brunswick, 30% of the local polling booth voted Green. And we thought if we were going to do this anywhere, this is the place to do it, and this is the time to do it. There was talk of a price on carbon, and it seemed like people were finally aware that things had to change. And we thought that people would vote with their wallets. So we embarked on this idea that we would build a zero carbon building, a triple bottom line housing project that focused on sustainability, focused on community, and focused on affordability. That we would try and make all those things happen simultaneously, and that we would try and encourage the rest of the market, so Grocon, other property developers, to do something similar. So we're going to use this as a prototype. We're going to show that you could do all those things simultaneously. We're going to open the building up to tours, use it as an education piece, and try and get the market to shift. That was our goal. There was lots of failures in that, and I'll tell you about some of those along the way. Our whole approach on the Commons was about, our sustainability was one of reductionism. It was about this idea of building less to give more. And the big thing for us was taking out the car parking. So the building cost $7.1 million to build, and we took the basement car park out, and reduced the build cost by $750,000. So we made a 10% reduction in the cost of the apartments. So reduced the cost of all the apartments by about $35,000 each. We then put in the highest ratio of bikes to apartments in the country, not because we made up some random number, but we worked out what was the bike parking ratios in the Netherlands, and we used that as our bike parking ratio. So in the Commons, the planning scheme says that we need 5 bike parks and 29 car spaces. Instead, we put in 72 bikes and 0 cars. And then we put in quite a dictatorial green transport plan that says if you live in the Commons, you have to pay $500 a year per bedroom, which goes to your green transport levy, which will pay for either your Go Get car share membership towards driving hours or towards your Mikey. So the idea is that it's actually, if you decide to bring a car to the Commons and try and park it on the street somewhere nearby, you're actually disincentivized by that, for that financially. We took out all the individual laundries and instead put a single laundry on the roof, like you would find in any building in Stockholm or in Barcelona. And by doing that, all of the apartments got 2 square meters bigger in the living rooms, and they all got $6,000 cheaper. So there's no European laundries, and they got cheaper. There's less plumbing throughout the buildings. Rather than having 24 washing machines, 24 troughs, 48 stopcocks, 24 ton dishes and floor waste throughout the building, 24 European cupboards. We've got 1 laundry on the roof with an outlook across a rooftop garden and the city, 6 washing machines. And if you've got shitty nappies in one and business shirts in the other, then it works. And also this works as, I would say, the single most important community anchor point within the building. So it's not the kind of, you know, the beautiful green garden, it's the laundry. It's the place where it doesn't matter whether you're an architect or a teacher or a CEO, you've got to wash your clothes. And this is the place where everyone comes together. We used some of the savings from, the other thing that I didn't mention about the car park was that what normally happens at the front of a building is that you'll have a driveway, and to have the driveway, you have to have a crossover. And so, so that the car can come in. So the footpath becomes uneven, so it becomes hard to traverse. It becomes less accessible. So instead of having a driveway and a crossover and a ramp going to a basement, the footpath just runs through, so it's really easily trafficable. And also where the driveway and the roller door would have been, we put in a wine shop. And that's a really good outcome for the residents upstairs. But we also sold the wine shop, the tenancy, for $425,000. And we used $225,000 of that to fund the rooftop garden, and the other $200,000 to use to upspec the insulation and the double glazing. So we've got the best windows and the best insulation, you know, in the city at the time. We then modeled the building on a minimum standard of 7.5 stars, not 6 stars, not 5 stars, but minimum 7.5 stars on a NatHERS. And our thermal modeling said that the building would operate between 19 and 27 degrees. And obviously we put in some solar controls around how to deal with heat gain from the west and the north. I'll talk you through those in a minute, because I'm sure there's some people in here that are going to want the details. But fundamentally, if we were designing in Germany, a 19 to 27 degree comfort range is fine. But in Australia, we're meant to design between a 19 and 23 degree comfort range. So apparently we're not as strong as our German counterparts. Well, historically we used to be, because my grandmother never had any air conditioning and she could deal with it. But anyway, so we took all the air conditioning out. And then by doing that, we kept all of the cost of the apartments down by about another $4,000 each. So constantly reducing the price of housing. And also reducing the cost of operation. So Tam and I live in this apartment actually in the Commons, and our bill is generally around $42. Yeah, and when we're away, our usage is 1.2 kilowatts a day based on our fridge use only, because we've got a kill switch by our door, like a hotel, which turns off everything except the fridge. So we know how much our fridge uses. And interesting, while I'm on the fridges, because this might interest you, the Commons is located right next to Anstey Station, right next to the Upfield bike path, right next to the 503 bus, and about 150 metres from the 19 tram. It's about 120 metres from the Brunswick market, which is like the cheapest fruit and veg in Brunswick, and right near the Royal Nut Company. And then obviously close to A1 Bakery and a whole bunch of great stuff in Sydney Road. we designed really, really small fridge cavities. There's only 13 models of fridge that fit in here. And we did that intentionally. And the idea was that to stop people wanting to drive to the supermarket. So we surveyed people when they first moved in to the Commons. And when people first moved in, about 55% of people had cars. And of those 55% of people, everyone with a car drove to the supermarket once a week to do a big shop. At the end of the first year, people realized that it was pointless going to do a big shop because it didn't fit in your small fridge. So people started to shop more locally, started to walk. And also because there's no car parking here, people were having to drive. They were parking their cars on top of the Brunswick market where they would rent a spot for like $600 a year, but they'd have to go there and go up this really steep ramp and get there. And it was more difficult to get your car than it was to just walk to the Brunswick market and get your fruit and veg. Anyway, after 1 year, it went from 55% of people driving to get groceries once a week to everyone walking regularly, and only one person in the Commons out of 51 actually driving, each week. So again, it's kind of this sustainability through dictatorship, small fridge cavity. And lots of people moved in with these big fridges and they were like, it doesn't fit. And I'm like, oh, it's terrible. I'm sorry. And, but really it was meant to be. Have any of you been through the Commons? Yeah, okay. And were you taken into the bin room when you were there? You weren't taken into the waste room. Yeah. So one of the interesting thing about the Commons is, so we were thinking about, how do we deal with waste? The thing about the small fridge cavity and the proximity to the shops has meant that our organic waste is reduced drastically. And in fact, all of the waste is reduced drastically from when people first moved in to what it's like now, 4.5 years later. So when you walk into the bin room at the Commons, the first thing that you're confronted with is you've got commingled recycling. No, you've got the organics bin, commingled recycling, worm farm, soft plastics, e-waste, and then the very last thing right in the back corner is your landfill bin. So when we first moved in, according to our waste management plan, we needed 10 240 litre waste bins and 10 240 litre commingled bins. That's all we needed. What we've got now is 3 240 litre landfill bins and 5 240 litre commingled bins, and then we've got a bunch of other things. But the commingled bins also do the wine shop and the cafe. We've got a tiny amount actually going to landfill. And I think that the answer to a lot of that, I think, is the small fridge cavity. This idea about sustainability through reductionism, there's no ceilings in the Commons. So don't worry about the aesthetic. Think about what can you take out. And so so we didn't get attached to any kind of aesthetic idea. Instead, we kept on asking ourselves, if we don't need it, can we take it out? So there's no ceilings. There's no meter cupboards. So all the meters are just exposed. There's no tiles in the bathroom. It's just fibre cement sheet with the zero VOC water-based epoxy painted on it. There's no chrome on the tapware or on the door hardware. It's taken off the production line before it gets wrapped and shipped to the chrome platers, chrome plated, rewrapped, sent back to the tapware company, and then sent out to you. It's kind of we take all those things out. So there's no chrome in the building anywhere. There's lots of, instead raw brass. The door furniture on all of the joinery is not handles, but it's holes. So I don't know if it seems simple, but you make a reduction rather than addition. It's less material rather than more material. And so the project architect, Bonnie Herring, that worked with me was kind of absolutely rigorous about asking herself, with every decision, do I need it or can I take it out? Yeah, and what you would have seen too is recycled timber floors. So every apartment has a different floor because we couldn't find, 2,500 square meters of the same floor. So they come from different scout halls and different houses all around the city. And there's this beautiful story through each house. We've got 135 mil wide boards in ours. Kirsten has 88 mil boards. Jess has got 66 mil boards, and they're different species, and they're all top nailed, not glued. And what that means is that at the end of this building's life, in 100 or 150 years, this floor can be relifted and used again. What that means is that the floor squeaks a bit, which is okay. It feels like a real floor. and it's wax finished with zero VOC wax product. So if it gets scratched, you can just add some more wax on it. You don't have to, there's no polyurethane in there. But importantly, because it's not glued down, you don't move into an apartment and have a litre of toxic glue per square metre off-gassing into your apartment for the first 3 months that you live in there. The interesting thing about when we moved into the Commons is that we thought that it would be a bunch of kind of young professionals coming in. Our first purchaser, the early adopter, the first ever adopter was actually Ursula. Ursula's 65. She's a downsizer from the Blue Mountains. So she didn't want to have to deal with maintenance. She cares deeply about sustainability. She wanted community, and she also wanted a sense of security. So the apartment worked for her. The second purchaser was Susan, 72-year-old, wanted to live closer to her family. And then Marianne, a 61-year-old who was living in a flats in Parkville, but wanted to be elevated a bit to have a higher sense of security. Interestingly, for all of them, it was about this idea of community that was really important. So they weren't attached to cars. 72% of the purchasers in the Commons were females. All of our same-sex couples are females. There were 3 contracts of sale that were torn up through the cooling off period. So I spoke to the agent about this through the sales process. All 3 of those contracts of sale that were torn up by men who took it to their accountants or their financial advisors to ask them, should I buy into this building? And their accountants and financial advisors said, don't buy into it. It doesn't have a car park, doesn't have an individual laundry, doesn't have air conditioning. It's a bad investment. So they didn't buy in. I'm still friends with one of those guys now, actually. The interesting thing is right next door to this building is a building called Geox. It was designed largely for investor stock. It's got air conditioning, car parking, individual laundries. As a result, it sold at about the same price per apartment, but the living rooms are really small, right? It's also got second bathrooms. The Commons doesn't have any second bathrooms. 1 bathroom per apartment, no en-suites, which saved everyone $9,000 off the price of their apartment, and their living rooms get bigger. So the Geox and the Commons sold at about the same price per apartment in 2011. Fast forward about 5 years, and the Commons, and this is one of the things that I'm kind of ashamed about with the Commons, and it's kind of taught us a bit about Nightingale, and I'll talk to you about that. But the Commons now has become a retirement home for rich hippies. So every time an apartment in the Commons gets resold, it's now the most expensive apartment in Brunswick. And back in 2011, it was the cheapest apartment in Brunswick, or one of the cheapest apartments in Brunswick. The Geox next door, so the Commons has gone up in value by 30% on what it was worth when we sold it. And Geox next door has gone down in value by 15%. All the guys that tore up their contracts because their financial advisors told them, don't do that. You've got to have a car space. It was just interesting for us to see that females cared more about, this idea of home and less about what their financial advisors thought was about a house being an asset. So it was interesting to see 2 genders looking at housing very differently. One as an asset and one as a home. There's a strong sense of community at the Commons, and it's interesting for us as architects because we approached it thinking that how do we encourage community, and we looked at at examples in Copenhagen, in Barcelona and Rome, but fundamentally what we've worked out is that we can build the armature for community, but it actually depends on who lives there. And so we've got this great note board here, blackboard downstairs and on the roof, and everyone leaves notes to each other. And it was really, really good for like the first 5 weeks when everyone moved in. It was really friendly. And then people started leaving like anonymous notes, who left the such and such in the lift, there was a social worker that lived on our level, Fanny, and she wrote on the blackboard saying, I'm going to ask for 2 things on this blackboard. If you leave a note, please make sure it's positive, and please sign your name. And that changed everything. So the way now that the blackboard is used is that everyone keeps their communication positive and everyone signs their name. So, you can't be anonymous here. You need to actually take ownership of your communication. Obviously, as things have evolved over time, there's now also Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, many WhatsApp groups. So There are people like the worm lovers WhatsApp group, the green thumbs WhatsApp group, the dog lovers WhatsApp group, the babies WhatsApp group. So there's all these different groups with different kind of, the bulk foods WhatsApp group. So people have different kind of areas, and so different residents kind of, jump in on that. There's productive gardens on the roof. We learned a lot about the productive gardens. So we put all the productive gardens on the north side, and all the kind of communal spaces on the south side. And this was the tallest building in Brunswick at that time, like this far north in Brunswick. And the second year in, it was really hot, and this got absolutely caned, and everyone lost all of their produce, after like a 4-day heat wave. And it taught us a lot about the challenges of trying to grow things on the roof, and that the challenge is actually the wind, not the sun. Really, really hot northerly winds, and how to deal with that. And so when I show you Nightingale images soon up, you'll see that we kind of changed our approach to that. So there's some successes and some failures, and I would say that this works really, really well from a community building point of view, but it's been disappointing from a yield point of view, because, in summer, it's tough to make things, thrive here. This is our clothesline. This is a great success. It's on the south side of the building, and the south side of the roof of the Commons flourishes because it's protected from the northerly wind. And we thought that this would be the side of the roof that struggled. So it was an interesting learning for us. There's a light court in the middle. So there's these 2 light courts. They've got all these ferns, and they've got misting sprays in them. So in summer, the misting spray through the ferns. Everyone has their windows which open up in there. So we don't have ventilation, but we have what smells like a rainforest coming into your apartment. And the air in here is about 6 degrees cooler than the air outside. So the misting sprays, as it evaporates, works incredibly well. The apartments are really, really simple. And we've been told a lot in Australia, the media, everyone says in Australia, you can't raise a family in an apartment. But you can raise a family in an apartment in Barcelona or in Paris, but you're in Copenhagen, but you just can't do it in Australia. So Ben and Georgia lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Commons. When we started work on Nightingale 1, they fell pregnant. They sold their apartment on Instagram in about 2 hours. So a lot of people in the Commons don't like real estate agents. So Ben and Georgia put a thing on Instagram, and it said, "Oh, we're selling our apartment in the Commons. The real estate agent says it's worth $490,000. So we're going to sell it for $480,000. No singing, no dancing. Direct messages if you want to come and have a look." They had 4 people enter a mini ballot to buy their apartment, and they sold it for $480,000, what they advertised it for. And they moved into Nightingale to have a kid, and they live next door to Brad and Ellie in Nightingale, who have 2 kids, and they live above Nick and Mia, who have a kid and who are about to have another kid. The apartments themselves are quite Spartan and simple, but people bring their own life with them. And the interesting thing for us is, for anyone that's seen the Commons lately, when it was finished, nothing had grown on that facade. So this is just shipping chain on the north facade. So this faces north. This screen wraps around from the west. And I'll just quickly talk on, does anyone want me to nerd out on what the construction is? Can I see a show of hands for the nerds? Okay, cool. So the western wall is built up. So the outside cavity is, this is fiberglass made in Dandenong by a company called Amperlite. It's got an opaque gel coating on the outside of it. It's used for fertilizer factories. It's incredibly robust. It's got a 40-year life just on the coating itself. Behind that is a 75mm cavity. And at the bottom of this wall is a perforated copper fin, which allows cool air in. And then up on the parapet, on the back side of that screen, are vents. So as the sun wraps around from the north, it starts to heat that wall. The air inside the wall heats, comes up and ventilates out through there. So we don't capture the heat, but we exhaust it all before it actually hits any of the apartments in there. All of these apartments face north. They've got lift and slide doors, so Austrian door hardware, so with gaskets all around it, double glazed, argon-filled glass with 10.38 laminated glass on the outside. So we're right next to the train. So Tam and I are in this apartment here. We're 7 meters from the southbound train line there. And our timber lift and slide door, so timber works really well acoustically, really well thermally. And the lift and slide doors, as you pull the handle down, it lifts it up off the gasket and onto the brass roller. But when you close it, you can lock it down to the gasket. You get a perfectly airtight seal. The balcony depths are calculated so that the balconies allow winter sun penetration, but they don't allow summer sun penetration. And the tragedy in that is that we can't do that anymore. Under Minister Wynn's Better Apartment Design Standards, it says that if you design an apartment in Melbourne now, the minimum balcony depth has to be 2 metres. To get the right solar shading on these apartments, we actually need 1750. Right, so now under the Better Apartment Design Standards, I can't do good passive heating in winter because some bureaucrat says that I've got to have a particular depth of my balcony based on Sydney standards. Yeah, but so that's been drawn down from Sydney's SEP 65 Apartment Design Standards. While I think the Better Apartment Design Standards are really good, I think that needs to be discretionary based on your latitude, not based on, you know, an idea about kind of space. These are shipping chains on the front of the building, and at the bottom of each apartment here is a big planter box set into the deck, and in that planter box is an irrigation system that goes off every hour for 4 minutes. And then there's wisterias in there, 2 wisterias planted in each of those. And so for anyone that's seen the Commons lately, it's totally covered in green. So, you know, and the incredible thing about that is that if you see it now, and in summer, it's this incredibly green, lush facade. And that for those people that live in there, they can trim out as much or as little. You can have as much outlook as you want, or you can have as much privacy. You can have as much shade as you want, or you can have as little as you want. What we learned out of the Commons was that the Commons was a success. So, and let me talk about the carbon neutrality piece. We didn't make that work. We made the car-free piece work, but we didn't make the carbon neutrality piece work because a packaged heat pump for us in 2012 was going to cost $300,000. We just bought one for Nightingale 1 at $90,000. The technology is getting much, much better. The coefficients are getting much, much better, and the costs are coming down really, really fast. So there is still some gas plumbed into the Commons. So we've got gas-boosted solar hot water. We've got, back then we were using gas. Anyway, now we don't. So I'm sure you're going to give me a hard time about that later. So what we worked out was that good design was only part of the equation. That decision makers in property set the goalposts, and the reason that the Commons was able to achieve all of those things is because we funded it ourselves. We put together a consortium of 6 architects who all put their money together to try and help this happen, and we literally bet our house on it. And that property development is a business and not an urban housing provider. To be the decision maker, you need the money. When we started the Commons, we were it was 2007. By the time we finished, it was 2013. In the middle was a global financial crisis, and we lost our bank funding, and we didn't have enough money to complete it. And we were lucky enough, I heard that some of you are in the Cape, we were lucky enough that Small Giants came and bailed us out. So we were lucky that we could find a philanthropic organisation. We went to Urban Coop and tried to sell Urban Coop the Commons, and it wasn't quite the right fit for them. And we then tried to find someone else that wanted to finish, you know, our dream. And we were really lucky to find Small Giants who bailed us out and funded the project through to completion. But what we learned about that is that we needed to be smarter financially to be able to make these things work. And I guess the other thing, the reason that I talk about that property development is a business, not an urban housing provider, is that I want to build housing for people, you know. So Nightingale is about delivering housing at zero profit, because what I want to do is deliver quality housing. But when I work for a property developer, what drives the outcome is the spreadsheet and the profit and the returns to shareholders. And that the housing is just a byproduct of that. It's something you've got to do to get there. It sounds cynical, doesn't it? So what we learned out of that was that if we wanted to make this happen, we needed to focus on. So Nightingale essentially is the idea of taking this idea of the triple bottom line housing outcome and then building a financial model to be able to replicate that. And it was about this idea of the democratization of capital. So the problem with property development generally is the people that choose to do property development real estate agents. Some of the clients that I've had in Brunswick come from a range of different backgrounds as then they're property developers. So yeah, some real estate agents, a fishmonger, a guy from plastics manufacturing, but they've got some money and they decide that they're going to do property development. So they have no background in housing or architecture or urban design, but they've got money and they want to make more money, and so they end up doing housing. So the Nightingale model is about this idea of democratization of capital, where we take small amounts of money from lots of people, essentially fundraise the capital, and then get the architect to take direction, not from one person with a lot of money, but instead through the people that will actually end up living in the building, the people that will be housed there. And we want to make sure that we can replicate that model. The difference between a standard development model and the Nightingale model is this kind of value proposition to purchasers. So in Nightingale 1, that was about $95,000. So we buy our land at the same price as a property developer. We pay our architects and our consultants the same as a property developer. But with Nightingale, we don't engage a marketing team, come up with a smart name for the building, take photos of cafe latte and people in active wear running around the park. We don't build a dimensionally inaccurate display suite. And we don't pay some guy in a dark pinstripe suit with shiny shoes to sell apartments. The interesting thing about real estate agents, is there any real estate agents here tonight? No, there's not. Amazing. The interesting thing for me as an architect is that architects get paid on a percentage of construction cost. Real estate agents get paid as a percentage of revenue. So what we found at the Commons, because there was the small giants engaged a real estate agent to sell the Commons, and the real estate agent got paid the same amount to sell the Commons in 6 weeks as what Bonnie Herring did at Breathe Architecture, and she worked on that project for 3.5 years. And she's one of the best architects in the country. So this is a problem for me. So we take that out, and then we build, even though we don't have a basement car park and air conditioning and en suites and individual laundries, we have the best double glazing money can buy, better insulation, thicker walls, a building that doesn't burn, you know, a building that doesn't, or crack, or a building that's watertight. So we focus on all of those things. You know, really simple but well insulated buildings. So our construction cost ends up costing about the same as a standard building, but just with a different kind of set of focuses. And then we deliver at zero profit, but whatever the cost of the capital is. And currently we're borrowing capital at about 15%, and we're securing debt at about 6 or 5%. But if anyone here has a shit ton of money and wants to lend us money at less than 15% for the startup capital, then we can tune this down a bit more. But standard property development starts at 20% and then pushes up as high as the market will bear. So in Nightingale 1, when the property valuers came through to value the properties at settlement time for the residents, Ben and Georgia, the couple that you saw that moved from the Commons to Nightingale 1, their apartment was valued $95,000 over what their contract price said, which meant that they thought they had to get lender's mortgage insurance at $25,000, but all of a sudden they didn't have to get that, so it saved them 25 grand in LMI. It's a financially transparent model. So we sell the housing at what it costs us to build, and we show everyone that, which is why you don't need a real estate agent. We protect affordability into the future because we don't want this to become a retirement village for rich hippies. So instead, we put a restrictive caveat which runs with the Nightingale apartments. So if you're buying at $95,000 under market, you can't sell it tomorrow and make that $95,000. Otherwise, we should just charge a profit margin and make more money, and I could buy a boat or something, or a car. I could buy a car. That'd be nice, would it? No. So we have this caveat which protects affordability in the future. All of our projects are carbon neutral, so there's no gas can be pumped into any Nightingale project. And then we work with Tas Hydro. So we've got a PPA in place where we buy 100% renewables or 100% green power into the building. And unlike every other developer that tries to wrap everyone up into an embedded network where they clip the ticket and charge a percentage markup on that bulk price, we pass that that bulk purchase price on to the residents. So if you live in Nightingale 1, you're buying 100% green power, 100% renewables, cheaper than anyone else in Brunswick is paying for black power. So why would you ever change? So Nightingale 1, it's a pretty simple building. Again, it's not kind of architecturally iconic. The interesting thing here is the parklets out the front. So when the Nightingale residents moved in and the Commons residents kind of, started hanging out with them, they started to kind of occupy the street together. And it's an interesting idea about community. So the Commons had a community and then the Nightingale had a community. And then this other community started to form on the street between these two things, and it started to kind of cross-pollinate. Both communities lobbied the council to close the street. And last April, the council agreed to close the end of Florence Street, to pull up the asphalt and replace it with grass and trees. And that happens in a 3-stage process. Stage 1 is these parklets get put in so that the cars can't park there anymore. Stage 2 is a survey process. So they survey all the residents and ask them what they thought. And they've completed stage 2 now. So they just got 414 responses. And they got one response saying there should be more car parks there. The other 413 were saying this is great. And then stage 3 is when this building finishes construction, they're going to come back and pull up the asphalt and replace it with grass and trees. And so I think that one of the greatest results out of this is actually not by us as architects, but it's by the residents of both the buildings being actively engaged with their council. We focus on housing people. We take the residents through the building as the building's being built. So they get to meet the builder on site, they get to meet each other, and they go through the site about once every 6 weeks, depending on the stage. So by the time they move in, they already know each other. Has anyone seen the silo with Jacinda Ardern painted on it? So that's that silo up there. She's in town tomorrow. She's going to come and have a look. And this is Nightingale 1. So this idea of community not just happening within the building, but being able to spill out to the broader community. And so I think that a lot of you would get this, that sustainability isn't just about the environment. It's about us, as a species existing within a broader environment, within that ecosystem, and how do we deal with each other in community. You'll be happy to know this is 100% recycled PET, respun out of plastic bottles. Recycled bricks. So these are blonde bricks. No one likes blonde bricks. They're the cheapest recycled brick you can get. They're 70 cents each. And we use them because we think they're cool and because they're cheap. Melbourne bluestone. And then some planting along here. No meter cupboards, so you can just see what's in there. And the kind of, it's kind of beautiful, structure of the building. You get to see what it's made of. And the building gets opened up in the morning. So there's gates at the front, and it gets opened at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it gets closed down at 6 o'clock at night. So anyone can come through and use the disabled toilet, the disabled shower, and the ambulant toilet in there. So the broader community can actually use this building because the council has stopped doing that. And again, this idea of sustainability through reductionism. So the stairs, rather than being enclosed and glazed, just have cyclone wire mesh on it, and they look out onto the fernery. And the apartments in Nightingale 1, again, incredibly kind of simple, Spartan, you might say. So pretty tough apartment, but a beautiful floor and a beautiful kind of timber glazed door in there, that lift and slide door. Oh, is anyone going to give me a hard time about the concrete? Should we talk about concrete now or later? Now, all right, let's talk about concrete. So did we think about embodied energy of concrete? Absolutely. Why is there so much concrete in this building? And how much recycled content is there? So the answer to that is as much recycled content as we can get the engineer to bear. And what's that mean? In the precast panels, there's about 30% recycled content. Not that great. And in some of the floor slabs, only 8%. So they're post-tension floor slabs. And we couldn't get the builder to agree, or the concreter to agree to more than 8%, because they've got to lay the floor, and because of their building cycles, they want to go up the next day, and they need these things to cure fast. So that's the downside. We know how much energy is associated with carbon, and we know how much of that is wrapped up in this building. And we also understand it's going to take this building about 20 years to pay down how much energy is in the structure itself. But what we think is that this building's going to last about 100 years. The whole thing is designed on a simple idea of exposing all the thermal mass, that it works like a wine cellar, that it's cross-ventilated, and that it's shaded, so it's passively shaded. And basically, this building takes out all the peaks during during the high daytime temperatures, and then the troughs, the nighttime temperatures, and it gives us a very, very stable environment. So if you think about that, 90% of a building's carbon emissions happens through its building operations, not through its inception, then we understand that both those things are important, but our choice was to focus on building operations. And this building operates without air conditioning. Does anyone want to argue with me about that? It's, I understand. What's that? Yeah. So it's getting easier all the time. So we'll be able to go to geopolymers and so it will get easier. And obviously, as our engineering communities get more comfortable with cement replacement, it's going to get much, much easier. I'm sure in 5 years' time, it'll be hard to imagine that anyone's putting Portland cement in anything. You would like to think. Who cleans the blonde bricks? Oh, some guy from Eco Brick. He's got a machine that's got like this chisel which comes up like that. It's kind of like a V in it, and he drops it down there. And there's actually a bunch of Maori women that were working there when I was there. So a bunch of very tough, people working there. So I guess it's a question: do they use acids? Is that what you mean? Well, and that's a really good question. So the modern slavery issue, how do we deal with that? We sourced as much, so all of our tapware. So our strategy is to source materials as close to here as possible, thinking that the best thing that we could possibly do is to have Australian labour or Victorian labour associated with that. So all of our tapware is manufactured in Australia, in Victoria. Our door hardware is manufactured in Victoria. Some of our coatings are manufactured in Victoria. The bricks were, sourced locally. The bluestone was sourced locally. So and I think that that's obviously much better than, coming from, but I'm not sure. It looked like really tough work, actually. Yep. Yeah, so Nightingale 3 was totally designed to be CLT. And in fact, one of Nightingale's sponsors is XLAM. And, we spent a lot of time with Robbie Sfars designing the whole place for CLT. Carlton Connect was going to be CLT. And, cross-laminated timber. So, it's a great idea, right? So you use 100% renewables. It's really fast to build. It happens heaps in Europe. And the Victorian Building Authority has just quashed Carlton Connect being built in CLT because we're so gun-shy here about flammable buildings that the amount of layers of plasterboard, even though we know the char ratings, we know how that all works, in Victoria, it's incredibly difficult at the moment. So Lead and Lease haven't been able to get that through. Yep. Yes. Forte in Docklands. Yep. Well, so Brisbane and Sydney operate under different fire codes than we do here. Forte existed before the La Crosse fire. So I don't think Forte would get up again now after the La Crosse fire, after the Spencer Street fire. Yeah, so, and it's not the MFB making that determination, it's the Victorian Building Authority. Hard to argue with that. So everyone in Europe is obviously building out of CLT because there's no carbon associated with it. It's from 100% renewable sources. It sequesters carbon. It makes total sense. We would love to build out of CLT. And so Nightingale 3 was meant to be our first project. Everything was designed on that. And then we've had to go back to concrete just because it just became impossible for us. We were told that you can't grow plants on the south side of the building. That's not true. This is Virginia creeper. after 1 year. So that's the commons across the road now. So the image you saw before, with no plants on it, that's what it looks like now. And of course the commons, this is in summer, but in winter, it's just got this kind of web of kind of vines, which is pretty cool. And it casts this incredible shadows through the building. In springtime, it comes into flower. In summer, it turns deep green. And in autumn, everything changes color and all the leaves kind of rain down on the street, which is kind of pretty cool. This is the rooftop of Nightingale 1. These are some of the kids from Nightingale 1. It's difficult to see here, but there are sand pits in there. And so the sand pits and the grass were additions asked for by the people specifically with kids moving into this building. So they were the things that they asked for. And we explained to them that, you're going to have to find a way to mow the grass without using petrol. And they said, no problems. They've got an electric mower. Or no, they've got a hand mower. But it was important to them to have some grass on the roof. This is a really kind of popular part of the roof. It's used a lot by people with kids and people with dogs. And the people with kids have now asked the people with dogs to not let their dogs go to the toilet on this grass, because so there's been an agreement so that the dogs go out on the street and the kids can hang out on the grass. But sorry, what's your question? Oh, so that was so over here I was showing that there's planter boxes in each of these apartments. Oh no, so that's actually behind here. So that photo before is the rooftop of the Commons, the first building. And that's actually got a lot better now as the wisteria is wrapped up over the top of that. So it's actually working as a windbreak now. So the vegetables are doing better in summer on the Commons. But it was interesting engaging with the residents early and finding out what it was that was important to them. This is some of the residents from the Commons and the Nightingale shortly after they moved in together, and dragging kind of their furniture out on the street, just pulling some bollards there, closing the street and using it. And this was kind of became the catalyst for the closing of the street. And what's interesting about this is that this lady lives further up the street. She doesn't live in either of those buildings. This couple doesn't live in the Commons on Nightingale. They live on the corner of Albion Street. And there are a number of people here that these guys are moving into Nightingale Brunswick East. They don't even live in this Nightingale, but they're friends with someone else here. But it was interesting that it actually, the community happened in the Commons, then it happened in Nightingale, then it happened between both buildings, and then it started to involve other people in the street. And before that, it was, pretty hostile living in Brunswick when I first moved in there. Nightingale 2. So the idea was that we could replicate this. So Nightingale 2 is about to finish. They've just reached practical completion. They're settling in about 2 weeks' time in Fairfield, right next to Fairfield Station. Nightingale 3, this was meant to be our CLT building, but it's now going to be concrete framed. Nightingale Brunswick East, this completes in September this year. And then Nightingale Village. So Nightingale Village was, I think, after we saw the success of the Nightingale and the Commons and what happened when you put buildings on both sides of the street, 2 streets south of the Commons, this guy is selling all these old properties there. And so we bought 7 properties on both sides of the street. So there's 3 on the south side of the street, 2 on the north side of the street, and there's no cars on the street. So we bring the cars in around from Hope Street instead. We pedestrianise the street. We work with Moreland to close the street to cars, again, to put vegetation in the street instead, and to open up for people. And then behind this building, on the south side of that, is the Urban Coop building. So we're putting Urban Coop in there as part of the Nightingale Village. And then the idea with Nightingale Housing as an organisation is that we kind of formed to be able to take each of the IP from each of those projects to then be able to share it with other architects to be able to, share this idea that we can ideally make it go viral. It hasn't really gone viral because it's really hard. So there's including, if you think about the 6 buildings that are coming out of Nightingale Village, we just settled on a property today. So if you include the property today, which we've just got a planning permit for, and we just settled on today, that's 12 Nightingales in total. And we started on the Nightingale journey in 2014. Thank you very much.
And now I'd like to introduce Nadine. I think you can take it from there. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to try to be brief because I'm sure everyone's really need to stretch a little bit. Thanks. Okay. So this is a project we're doing in Ceres in Geelong. This is totally different. This is not a very cheap project, obviously. And really, when we talk about sustainability and we talk about sustainable, being a sustainable architect, I think we're all trying to be, but it's not necessary that we always succeed. I mean, there's always challenges. So I don't want to go through the project and just pretend like, yeah, it's all fantastic. There's always challenges. And I want to tell you as well, some of the challenges that we face, not only in this project, in many projects, and like Jeremy touched on as well with the regulations, unfortunately, that we face, sometimes we're not being able to achieve what we would like to achieve. So you're going to have to bear with us sometimes. It's going to be a while. So this project is basically, this is a young couple, I mean, young probably just late 30s. We've done for them, we renovated their house in North Melbourne about 14 years ago. So after we finished their house, they moved to Singapore. 12 years on, they call us and they say, we would like you to design. We bought a block of land, a big farm of 80 acres in Geelong. The client comes from Geelong. She comes from Tasmania. They're both from basically farmers' background. And so they bought really the land not only to build a house with their 3 young boys, but it's really more the farm that's really more exciting as well, and what's happening in the farm at the moment. So this is the original house that was on the land many years ago, built in the late 1800s, and it became completely now as ruins. So the concept was really driven from the environmental context in the beginning. I mean, the first time I went on site when I saw these remains of this house, I was so excited, like being in Victoria to see some ruins was like, wow. It was really amazing. And so all these actually remains like of the existing house was all cleaned up. And there's a lot of scattered stones on the ground. So I decided we're going to have to use these stones. I couldn't really design the house. Like originally, I wanted to incorporate that within the house, but then it was going to be blocking the views and the north facing. So I decided to use more the scattered stone and to still have views to the ruins. In the same time, there's a lot of boulders on the side. I think there was like probably a quarry or something, and I wanted to emulate that in my design. And I mean, you can see this is actually a recent picture I took just a few days ago. I was on site on Monday, and you can see there's boulders everywhere you go on the side. So I really wanted to emulate that. But in the same time, not only basically the boulders, it was as well, I wanted to really, I wanted to create a playful architecture. I mean, of course, sustainability was always on my mind, but I wanted as well, I mean, I'm an architect after all, so I wanted to have really a more playful architecture. And I wanted to design something that will work in this context. So from the beginning, we started really thinking of something more, to have something clustered and like pavilions to actually capture the north as much as possible from everywhere, and to have more natural ventilation, which I'll come with it later on. But we did run a wind simulation, which I'll show in a minute, that really confirmed that having clustered design will help to actually disrupt the wind turbulence. I was on a research project, like I just was invited just once in RMIT, and actually I learned quite a bit in that. So, so I used that actually experience in this project. And actually the stones are going to be used, the rune stones are going to be used as support for the stairs of the CLT stairs coming up to upstairs later on. I mean, the project is still in progress, not going to finish probably before February next year. It would be probably locked up completely by Christmas this year. So these are the original drawings. Everything happened on Skype. The clients were in Singapore, so everything happened really on Skype. I'll share with them the screen, and we'll talk all over. I mean, I must say the whole house is really a reflection of the client aspiration and taste and what they really wanted to achieve for this for this block of land. But so the whole thing started basically by, instead of really having a roof and the wall, trying to really have something that wraps up completely as a protection, and have more like mezzanine, where everything is connected, where all the air can circulate, and where the kids can climb up. So we're going to have ladders where the kids can climb up to their bedrooms. We're going to have rope where they can climb up. We're going to have even like things on the CLT walls where they can climb up. They're quite active boys. I mean, you haven't seen them on site. It's just absolutely pretty scary how active they are. So this will keep them busy inside. And the whole idea of the concept is basically, so you capture all the views and all the spaces are down below, but then when you go up to your room, it's basically like a cave. So you go, there's not much really, so you're not going to be, like, they're not going to be studying in their room or anything. They have a whole kids' quarter for themselves where they can study downstairs and they can go up and sleep. So we eliminated in a way as well the idea of having a ground floor and a first floor. It's just a ground floor with mezzanine, basically. The other thing as well, I started taking like the ruins, like where the grid of the ruins, and then tessellated it more to actually capture more the, you know, the sun and the views, like, you know, rotated. Yeah. So these are the 3 boys there actively playing, and this is basically the kids' quarter there. So this is where we're going to have on that wall here, where they can climb up. So mind you, the client, when you were there the other day, she said, "Oh my God, this is quite more higher than I expected." But seeing them really on site, I think they'll be careful. You know, they'll be fine. I mean, wherever we're going to be putting is going to be quite safe. So these are basically the, you know, the early concept sketches, all done basically by hand. And so yeah, that's just a little spiel on the concept, basically. So the sustainability vision for the farm is to become autonomous and to achieve 0 emissions. It should become with time carbon positive. It's not going to happen overnight because, of course, we had some embodied energy with, you know, the concrete slab and all that stuff. But basically, the vision not only really for the house, it's for the whole farm. And when I say basically autonomous, we don't have gas on the site. We don't have, all the power is coming from solar panels. So it's going to be off the grid. And we have batteries, and we're still debating how we're going to have a backup. We looked at the wind as well. So there's been a lot of research done between us and the client. It's still work in progress on that, basically. So basically, I mean, to do anything sustainably, you have to start in architecture in a passive design, you know, like looking at passive design. Or I take passive design, not just like the passive house, the German passive house model. It's more the principle of the passive design. So obviously, and I think you're all in ATA, so I think you know them all. So I think the first one is obviously orientation, to really maximize the north facing, and to run daylight simulation and to get really as much as possible, you know, where we're going to get most of the light. I mean, I'm an architect. I must say I love glass. I can't deny it. So we do have quite a lot of glass, but we do use, we're using thermally broken aluminum on all the windows. So this is in the beginning, we did run on Rhino wind simulation, and it really helped to actually a little bit disrupt this wind turbulence. In the same time, for me, what's really, I found really very important is natural ventilation. Like Jeremy said, I mean, there should never exist a room without a window, without having really natural ventilation. So we do have quite a bit of natural ventilation circulating, and with stack ventilation as well, which is very, very important. I mean, again, playing up with the thermal mass, so decision to go with actually concrete slab. I mean, I would have loved to have more fly ash in the concrete slab, but unfortunately, as Jeremy said, we're still a bit a long way from all that. Yet when we really consider, like, the Pantheon was designed with actually volcanic ash, and there's no steel in the Pantheon, in none of the concrete, and it lasted over a few thousand years. And yet we're using, you know, concrete with steel that most of the time corrode as well. But anyway, we are at the moment and we have to deal with what we've got. But the reason why we went with a concrete slab is mainly for the thermal mass. That concrete slab is going to be just basically sealed. And there's nothing on this concrete slab, absolutely nothing. There's no tiles or anything. But in the same time, these were designed as well. We have in between the pavilion, I wanted the client to actually, while they're going from one pavilion to another, that they cross almost like in a garden or in nature. So most of the, in between the pavilion, we will have this a bit step down, and we're going to have actually on these style, and we're going to have greeneries. So it's just really bringing more a biophilic design inside the project as well. We did get the CLT approved, and I mean, we were looking at another project as well using CLT. I mean, of course, it's not non-combustible, it's fire retardant. So yeah, it was approved by the building surveyor. And the reason we decided to go basically with CLT panels, it's because we couldn't have done this in a traditional method. We couldn't have done it really with framing only. So, and I really wanted from the beginning the CLT, because even though it's timber, it's the way it's laid, it actually still have some thermal mass property. So that will actually increase even more the stabilization of the temperature inside the whole house. So, and it really worked really beautifully. I mean, this happened probably in less than 8 weeks, the whole CLT, the whole floors and the whole walls and the glue lamp, all was done. They all came, I think it was about 8 trucks in total. They came between CLT and glue lamp, came on site. And it was really all built in 8 weeks. So basically where the CLT is resourced, the whole, the plantation, they all come from plantation. The plantation is somewhere next to Wodonga. And so the timber comes from next to Wodonga to Wodonga's factory, where X-Lamp factory is. And then it's all manufactured there, the CLT. And then from Wodonga, it comes to basically to the site. And they try to make like the minimum possible transportation to arrive on site. And we got them all like basically straight away. So we stored them in a shed there. The glue lamp on the other side, it came from Hine Timber. I mean, again, we choose Hine Timber because we've used them before, even though they come from Queensland. They really have a very good chain custody. So we know like really exactly where the timber is coming. It's all again from plantation. It's all basically pine as well. And I think there's somewhere I think Robert Menzel from Hine Timber said it took like 17 minutes or something to replant everything timber that was used in the house. So it was really quite good. So yeah, I'm showing here really as well how the sequence, which I'll show you in a minute later on. So the other principle as well is, of course, the glazing. So, of course, having quite a bit of glazing, we need to use different technique to actually, protect as well from the heat. So we opted with the thermally broken double glazing aluminum. So basically all the glass is, we have, again, argon gas, we have the low E glass as well. And we have minimum, I think 12 or 18 mil between the two glass. I mean, again, there's other principle as well, apart from really choosing the glass and the glazing framing. It's really working with the landscaping. We have a great landscape architect, and actually he's going to be working as well with the deciduous trees and all that, how we're going to be protecting all this glass. We had a meeting as well on Monday, and I was telling the client we should have blinds, like we should have external blinds, because that's what will work best for these windows. They don't want to put external blinds, so these are one of the challenges. So I'm going to start with the challenges. So I said, well, at least we need to have really blinds from inside. So I mean, they're happy to do that, and I gave them as well a brochure on blinds that actually manufacture from recycled plastic. I mean, the other principle as well is insulation. I don't think we got 7.5 on this. I think we got close to 7. The energy rating on this. But of course, with all the CLT, I mean, the other reason as well with the CLT, it already have an R1, which is pretty good, which is very hard to get in any material straight away in R1. And on top of that, we have a breathable membrane here. And now we have, on all of them, we have about 40 mil here, and we have 95 mil on top on the roof. I think we're ending up having like R5.5 insulation on the roof, and about probably R0.3 something on the walls. So we, like the whole building is going to be really very well insulated. And with the thermal mass, it will work really quite well. The reason as well we went with the PIR, which is probably not the best sustainable, it's actually, it's a fire retardant. And because we have BEL 12.5 here, we had to choose something that again can work with the BEL. Originally as well with the, okay, I'll move to the material. I'll talk with the roofing as really on the materials. So these are all the kids actually who picked up all this material from the ground. So it really has quite a lot of history, that site, which is really beautiful. So yeah, like I explained before, they were all cut precisely. I mean, the shop drawings was really more or less easy because now we use all like software like Revit, and the engineers use as well like SketchUp, and the XLAM use like CAD 3D. So it was really easy to get the shop drawing straight away approved and like, bring them illustrated in our Revit model. And I mean, there was not even, I think, like not one mistake. I think there was one probably glue lamb, like maybe we had to cut a little bit of concrete for it or something like that. So really having enough site, production, it's really great. It really saved quite a lot of time. Yeah, so it really happened quite quickly. And I mean, the reason as well choosing timber is to sequester carbon. So that's how it's going to become carbon neutral in the future. It's really by sequestering the carbon. I think there's, yeah, I mean, you can see this is actually from the engineer, Nathan from Vistec, who've done that. So as well, so there isn't really as well, like the connection, it's not really a massive connection between all these CLT and these glue lamb. So you can see here the roof as well. They call it now in Geelong the Red House. I mean, we're very grateful because John Gollings have taken all these pictures. Oh, sorry, I had this, what did I do here? Oh, I'm moving fast. How do I do it? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm going back. Is that going back? No. No, that's the landscape. Oh, this one, yeah, sorry. I'm going the other way. I thought it's like the TV remote. You have. It's downloading. Oh. The client, the wife is actually a graphic designer, and he is an agricultural scientist. So they really make a very good pair, basically. Were we there? Yeah. Yeah, this one I was going to show you. The total volume of timber in this project is regrown in Australian pine plantation in 17 minutes. So I thought that was quite, sorry? Oh, yeah, no, replanted. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Better than nothing, though. Okay, so now we can move forward. And all the materials, I mean, I tried as well as much as possible to get all the materials sourced from Australia and locally. Most of it as well, all the labor and all the contractors are coming as well from Geelong, which is really quite good. And I mean, we tried as well, like, to specify as much as possible, everything to be with low VOC or no VOC. But like I said, again, these are challenges. You can't really all the time win on them. In regarding of the water, we already installed 80,000 liter water tank, which will provide for the residents' needs basically in the building. And gray water will be used to flushing toilets. And we provided a septic tank. And we actually put, sorry? Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, the septic tank. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember I've done actually many years ago where we didn't even use a septic tank. We got actually even, yeah, we got a geotechnical engineer as well who worked out on the whole land, how everything could be absorbed. But look here, I mean, we're not going to argue now. There's a lot of regulation and things. But anyway, the septic tank that was chosen, actually, you really need to empty it, I think, once a year or once every 2 years, something like that. There's already 4 existing dams to provide for the farm's irrigation as well. Water efficiency, I mean, again, I love heat pumps. They are the most efficient hot water units at the moment. It's just trying to hide them later on. It's going to be a problem. Energy efficiency. So basically, in regarding to renewable energy, originally we wanted the solar panel to go on the roof, and originally I wanted something integrated within the roof. So we looked at tractile. I don't know if you're familiar with the tractile tiles. The tractile tiles, unfortunately, we had a hurdle with the building surveyor where he said we need to have a performance solution underneath the solar panels, and it's not going to pass. And we needed to put like another, I think, something fire retardant plywood underneath them. And then the cost came completely off the roof. So we decided, because tractile as well, they didn't have anyone who could install them here in Victoria. So they were going to bring someone, an installer from Sydney. So it became too complicated. And we decided, look, okay, forget the integrated ideas. Let's just go with just color bond roofing, basically, and at least, because especially with all the fire that was happening with the cladding, so let's stick with color bond for the moment. And all the solar panels are going to be installed on a big shed in the farm. And even the client now is pushing for more than 30 kilowatts. So, because I mean, even though we're going to have batteries, you have to have as well, you know, still quite a few backup. Heating and cooling. Originally, as we specified, EcoHeat. I think you're all familiar with the EcoHeat, the solar air heating system. The client now decided, since we're putting so much solar panels, why don't we just use maybe like some air conditioning, or we're looking as well in hydronic heating or anything that can run on electricity, since anyway it's going to be a renewable energy. So we're still debating on that, but of course there will be fans as well to provide for all this. I mean, I'm not worried at all about the cooling. It would be fine, the cooling, even if we don't put anything, but it's only the heating. But now we're looking at as well on a big fireplace that's going to heat quite a bit, actually. So that will work until we figure out exactly what we're going to be doing with the other heating. I mean, again, with lighting, everything that's been specified as well, all with LED light, all solar external lighting farms. So, I mean, again, it's not about just having a lot of solar panels. It's, again, how much power we're using and how we're managing this power. I think people even like till now, they think, okay, we're putting solar panels so we can keep everything on. Like, no, it doesn't work this way. I mean, we have to manage and, you know, use that power really realistically. So the landscape, so basically these are actually pictures from, this is actually from Land Care. These are people who came one day last year who helped the clients to plant over 2,500 trees. So they planted quite a lot of native trees between lemon-scented gum and other gum trees, and they planted as well. They want to, I mean, the farm as well is going to be autonomous in a way. Like they already planted a lot of flowers, Protea and Banksia, and they already started selling them, even though the house haven't finished. So it's going to be really providing them as well with an income for the future. They're very, very much hands-on, the client, very much hands-on. They already have sheep on the side. They have few cows because her father actually have cows. I mean, you can see all the plants as well on this side. Some of the other wattles. I mean, again, with the biophilia, it's really very important to keep like the connection between nature and the house itself. So incorporating internal boxes and green paving everywhere. I mean, again, we have a great landscape architect, Rick Day, he was really good in working with indigenous planting and resourcing everything locally as well. So we're creating really, again, a garden that actually connect everywhere together, and really with the principle of xeriscaping with really minimum water. This is just a sequence of the prefabricated CLT and glue lamp construction. So even like basically the engineer provide us with a sequence, and that's exactly how it was built. That's your tummy rumbling. And this is a sequence of construction. So basically the concrete slab and then the framing, the CLT together. And then the cladding. Actually, the cladding now, the roof is almost finished. I think they're finishing now this roof here, and then they're going to start cladding the rest. And the windows happen end of this week. So these are some of the pictures. And then basically, we're hoping with the life cycle of the residence, it will negate the impact during construction. And that's it. Thank you.